the easiest hack, which is very simple for people who actually don't want to change, what they're eating, because that can feel a bit daunting at the beginning, is actually simply looking at the order in which you're eating the constituents of a meal. So in the studies, they found that just by eating your food in the right order during a meal, you can reduce the glucose spike of that meal by up to 75% while still eating the exact same foods. And this has a tremendous impact on your physical and your mental health. And so the correct order is, during a meal, vegetables first, proteins and fats second, and then starches and sugars last. And one of the main reasons this works in reducing the glucose spike of the meal is thanks to the effect of the fiber that is in the vegetables. And that fiber will reduce the speed and the quantity of glucose absorbed for later on in the meal. And then proteins and fats second. We know those also slow down gastric emptying, digestion speed. And so overall, if you're eating your meal in that correct order, you'll have a smaller glucose spike. And that means fewer cravings, being less hungry a few hours later, fewer energy dips, and then whatever symptoms you're contending with, maybe it's difficult menopause symptoms, maybe it's like acne, maybe it's just generalized inflammation, those will also be able to be reduced when you use the food order hack. And Sarah, is that a hack you guys have been testing? Because I'm so curious.
That is a hack we've been testing.
Yay!
So we've had lots of our participants who have tried the food ordering hack, where we've done it in quite a simple way, where they have cheese, they wait 15 minutes, and then they have white bread. And then and this is fasted, so it's a little bit controlled. And then the next day, they just have the cheese on the bread. So they have exactly the same food, but they don't have that 15-minute break. And we do see a significant reduction in their blood glucose response.
Nice. And for those listening, you don't have to wait 15 minutes. Even if you just reorder and have veggies first and carbs last, you'll still see an improvement in the glucose response. Because I think for most people, like waiting 15 minutes would be pretty impractical.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing this to really kind of show the proof of principle. And that was a question I wanted to ask is, could I have my mixed meal where maybe, I have my bit of pasta or rice, some chicken and some vegetables? Can I literally just eat my vegetables and then straight away the next minute start on to my protein, my chicken or whatever, and then straight away start on the pasta?
Absolutely. So, it's a spectrum. So if you were to wait 15 minutes between each constituent, you would see a greater effect. But also, if you just eat them one after the other, you will still see a pretty good effect as opposed to eating them all together or starting with the carbohydrates. So it's always, as it's always a spectrum. You can always do a bit worse for your glucose and a bit better for your glucose. But if you just reorder and eat everything in sequence, you will still see a pretty big impact.
So let's say we're out in a restaurant and we're having a starter. If I was to consume maybe a starter that was either vegetable-based or protein-based, and then I was to have, as typically would happen, it would be about 15 minutes later that your main course would come. When I'm consuming that main course, could I consume everything kind of all mixed in at once, having at least before that, having had either my vegetable, my high fiber or my high protein and fat starter?
So you don't need to do anything. You can decide how much you want to use the food order hack.
But would that work still?
Yes, it would work. Absolutely.
Okay.
And your example of adding, I just want to mention, because sometimes people can feel like, oh, does this mean I have to separate out every single dish, deconstruct every sandwich? And no, that's not the point. The point is using this information when it's easy. And so, Sarah, the fact that you mentioned the starter is actually the hack I was about to talk about. So we're just like super connected. The other hack is just add a starter that is built around vegetables, a vegetable-based starter to all of your meals, and then eat your regular meal as you would usually. That's just another way to use that same principle of fiber first to impact your glucose curve. And so let me give you an example. If you're having like a mixed dish, so let's say you're having, pasta with chicken in it and maybe, Parmesan and some cauliflower, you can just add a veggie starter, like a green salad, maybe with some vinegar at the beginning of the meal, and then eat the mixed main dish and still get a really big impact. And that'll be better than not having the vegetable starter. And you can compose with it as you wish. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
So what other than food ordering can we do, Jessie?
So I want to mention vinegar because this was quite shocking to me when I saw, the clinical studies that we're looking at the impact of vinegar on your meal's glucose spike. So if you have a tablespoon of vinegar, it can be any type of vinegar. Avoid balsamic glaze because that has a bunch of sugar in it. If you have a tablespoon of vinegar before a meal, either in a tall glass of water and you drink it, or as a dressing on your starter, for example, you can curb the glucose spike of that meal by up to 30% without changing anything of what you're eating during the meal. So you're just adding this vinegar ingredient. And the way it works is because vinegar contains a magical molecule called acetic acid that has a few impacts on the body. One, it slows down the breakdown of starch into glucose. And two, it encourages your muscles to uptake more glucose as it arrives in your bloodstream. And so as a result, the glucose spike of your meal is smaller. But you didn't change anything about what you were eating. And there's some really early studies that show, for example, the impact of just adding 2 vinegar drinks a day on glucose levels, on diabetes markers, also on polycystic ovarian syndrome symptoms. And they seem to have a pretty good effect. Small studies, of course, for these specific diseases. But overall, we understand the mechanism and it's really easy. And personally, this has helped me hugely with my cravings. If I have a vinegar drink before a meal, I know I'm going to be curbing those sugar chocolate cravings that usually happen for me an hour and a half after meals. And something else that I find really cool about this topic is that vinegar has been used for millennia in many cultures around the world, for example, in Iran. And people know culturally that it's a healthy thing to have in our diets, but they didn't understand why. And now we have some clues that it has something to do with glucose levels.
And Sarah, this sounds a little controversial. What are your thoughts on vinegar as the magic solution for our blood sugar?
So I must say, I was very skeptical. I thought, oh my gosh, this is one of those quacky food things. So yeah, I did go and check out the research, and I have to admit I was wrong in my opinion, and the evidence seems quite good on this. So I think it's a great hack. If you'd have asked me 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have said that.
And are there any randomized controlled trials actually showing sort of the long-term impact? Because I guess this is always the question, which is you can see an impact on your blood sugar, but you don't actually know what the long-term health impact is flow through. Have they reached this at this point, or is this sort of upcoming?
There are a few 6-month long studies, but I think those are the longest ones.
While we're on vinegar, I think something to ask, and this is more for something I don't know about. For people that then want to go away and do this and want to have a tablespoon of vinegar before every single meal, and let's say they're consuming a typical kind of UK eating style where it's 3 main meals, and 3 snacks, you're having 6 eating events throughout the day. If they were to have then 6 tablespoons every day before a meal, are there any possible side effects to this? So I'm just being cautious because I know that people will take these recommendations and I don't know the answer. And I know because you've researched this a lot, hopefully you will have the answer.
Of course. So there's a few key things to keep in mind.